Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from 2 Point Capital Management, an investment firm creating custom portfolios of stocks and bonds for individuals and institutions. 2 Point is dedicated to managing risk in good times and bad. 2 Point Capital Management, life opens up.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. We think of Connections as the public square, your chance to engage directly with elected leaders, and we've been holding a series of conversations with New York State lawmakers following the passage of the state budget. Today, we welcome a Democrat, a member of the New York State Assembly, and there is a lot to discuss. New York is one of a number of states attempting to deal with the spread of data centers and artificial intelligence, and the Trump administration won a legal battle against New York State's efforts to force ICE agents to take off their masks when conducting immigration enforcement. Assemblymember Demond Meeks from District Number 137 is with us. We're going to talk about a wide range of issues, public safety, education, and a lot more with the Assemblymember. It's nice to have you back here. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, there is a lot to discuss, and I'm going to start right with the stuff that is kind of the top of the national news, one of them being data centers. I just got an email from some of the folks down in Seneca Lake. They're concerned about a possible data center there, and the governor wants a one-year moratorium on data centers, saying the people don't want it, we want to slow it down. Where do you stand on data centers?
Yeah, I was part of that huge bipartisan vote, yes vote in favor and in support of the one-year moratorium on the data centers. I mean, there's so much research that we must do as a state, and we have to be intentional in protecting New Yorkers. You know, when we look at data centers, there's been a plethora of challenges, looking at driving up electricity rates, the cost of electricity, putting the strain on the electric grid, which is highly costly. And some of these things will end up on the backs of ratepayers. So we have to recognize the environment and the effects thereof. There's a huge need for water supply, for these data centers. Do we get that water back? Do we lose the water? There's so many questions and so much research that must be done. And I want to commend my colleagues as well as the governor for, supporting this effort. And we look forward to the governor signing off on the legislation that passed with a huge bipartisan vote in both the New York State Assembly and Senate.
I have mentioned to some of your colleagues on this program that when I drive around the state, even in rural areas, I see no data center signs all over the place. Mm-hmm. And when you see the polling on this issue, it does look pretty bipartisan. Yeah. But the people who are elected leaders in the state who have been on this program who are Republicans have largely opposed the moratorium. For example, your colleague Josh Jensen, a Republican in the Assembly, said that, that really should be a federal decision, that if New York State decides we're going to do a moratorium on data centers, that doesn't mean the neighboring states will. That just means development continues in other places that aren't here. What do you make of that?
Well, that's often the case. New York State has taken a lead on a number of things historically. I mean, I remember when we stopped smoking cigarettes in public spaces, right? And then go over to Pennsylvania and, you go in somewhere and you come out smelling like an ashtray. So I think that we have to recognize what we need to do to the benefit of New Yorkers. Okay, yeah, they may, jump out there and get ahead of us on creating a data center. It may take us a year or more later. However, I think what we're doing is to the benefit of the communities that we serve, knowing what our best practices and what type of effects it could potentially have. I mean, when you look at companies that we've had here in this community, like Kodak, you go to certain areas and you see language in the deed that protect them from being sued because of what potential harm may have been done historically. So, I mean, I think we're doing the right thing in getting ahead of this, doing necessary research and making decisions from there. And, we represent communities and we want to get feedback from these communities as well before we move forward.
The smoking ban thing is interesting. It feels like ancient history. It was like 20 years ago now. Yeah. But I remember the first time I was in a bar after the smoking ban had taken effect for a year or two, and then I was in a bar in another state where there was smoke, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm back in time here. So to your point, yes, sometimes there are going to be different standards state to state. Yes. I am curious to know why you think this has become largely a bipartisan issue to voters and to residents of New York State.
I just think sort of knowing the history of how new things come about and we don't know the effects, and after the fact we're hurt by it. So I think folks are learning from mistakes of the past to just try to be better. This isn't a no vote on the data centers, but it's saying, hey, let's take our time and do the research. Now, we know that there's a number of folks who are in support of it. Some of the Republicans are supporting it while others don't. But then you also have some who are in the building trades, that's looking forward to, building these data centers,
sure.
which would create, additional revenue for those industries. And some of them are union guys, right? And I'm a huge supporter of labor unions. However, on this particular matter, I just agree that let's stand with this moratorium and move forward from there.
And artificial intelligence in general is moving very quickly.
It truly is.
And there are a lot of people saying the same kind of thing that you just said about AI generally, that is there a way to slow it down? Why are we breakneck speed into the future when the AI companies themselves are saying that, like, best case scenario, it wipes out millions of jobs.
Yes.
Worst case scenario, Hollywood has already covered the ending. Like, look, why are we doing this? How do you feel about that?
So I agree. Something that I brought to the attention of my colleagues, I said, hey, remember I said this on this day, with artificial intelligence, we may have to be intentional as legislators to think about a universal basic income beyond just the fast food industry, right? Like, certain industries, folks don't make a lot of money, and it's like, okay, let's give them additional benefits to help make ends meet. But when you look at artificial intelligence, it's just a matter of time before we see the automotive industry highly affected. And, that industry, good middle income labor jobs and great benefits. But what happens when AI takes over that industry? And I think we have to look at the top of the food chain as it relates to how much money and revenue is being generated by AI, whose lap it's landing in, and how do we move forward to say, hey, we're going to hold you accountable, because if we don't generate revenue as like taxpayers, as everyday working class people, how do we survive? So I think that we're going to have to be intentional about conversations around a universal basic income around different industries that will naturally be phased out, because it's not as simple as go learn a new skill trade and go back to work. It's not that simple.
Sure. And then certainly there are tech companies themselves who are making a lot of money. There's a small sector that's getting rich pretty quickly. And so, whether it's a UBI or some kind of a wealth tax, I know there's a lot of ideas out there. The Governor Hochul, has opposed a super wealth tax in general.
Yes.
She's concerned that wealthy New Yorkers could move to other states. Where do you stand on a super wealth tax?
I've been supporting it from day one. It was since I entered the state assembly. I've introduced legislation personally, looking at different ways to generate resources by way of millionaires tax, and looking at the wealthier New Yorkers and calling for them to pay their fair share. When you look at wealthy New Yorkers, they're often making money on or different industries, making money on the backs of those who are struggling to stay afloat. When you look at the healthcare industry, those who are working as home health aides, those who are working as CNAs, LPNs, and so on, a number of them are struggling, but they're providing care for industries that's making millions upon millions of dollars.
But there's no momentum in your party to get this done?
I would say there's some momentum as it relates to legislative colleagues. However, you spoke of the executive in their position, but I can tell you that a lot of us, that's not our position.
So you think the governor's wrong on this one?
Oh, absolutely. I don't agree with the governor on this one. I think that we can be intentional in generating additional revenue to make sure that we're funding things that we need. When we look at the effects of the federal government and the big whatever bill, however they want to call it, it has had, dire effects on us as a state, our healthcare industry, food insecurity, you name it. It's having effects on us as a state. So we have to be intentional in doing right by, the masses to say, hey, at this time, we need to implement this millionaire's tax in this manner to generate X amount of billions of dollars in order to stay afloat. Now, once we get a new president, a new majority in Congress, then maybe we could walk certain things back. But I think that at this time, we have to be intentional in doing something to protect New Yorkers.
You're already looking ahead, thinking your party's going to be winning in 2026 and 2020.
Yeah, we claim that midterm.
You might not. I don't know. But look, can you be specific? There's a lot of flavors of it. What's an example of a specific, whether it's a percentage or what do you support? What do you think should happen?
So, I mean, there's been a number of different things introduced, looking at like having different tiers of tax rates, opposed to simply saying, okay, you pay like 7-8%. Well, if you're making this amount, yours would increase, based upon the amount of money that you're bringing in. And what we also find is sometimes we're taxing incomes where you have, the ultra wealthy that may not have a consistent income.
Like
right?
A new income. They have a lot of assets.
Exactly. So looking at, transfer of wealth, like transfer taxes, where you're transferring wealth from one family member to the next, things of that nature. But I think we have to be creative and paying attention to how money works in this day and age.
But, your colleagues who disagree with you on this would say, well, let's say I made $1 billion and I want to transfer it to family members. Shouldn't I have the right to do that? Why are you putting government hands on that?
Well, maybe it's my personal views, but I was always taught to he who much is given, much is required. And, while some of us operate like that, we've been dealing with generations of, this idea of trickle-down economics, which we know going back to the Reagan era, it just doesn't work. And when you look at these levels of poverty, it brings about so many other challenges in our community. And I think that, we have to hold the ultra rich accountable because folks aren't just doing it on their own. Yeah, you get some, the Warren Buffetts from time to time that may do something, a grand gesture of sorts. But I think that there's many more here in this state that can do better. Okay.
So, and I take your point about it should be new income. You want to tax new income?
Yeah, new income as well.
Okay, and you want to tax transfers of wealth?
Absolutely.
Okay, but new income at what? Is it $1 million? Is it $10 million? Like, what's the level that you really want to aggressively go after?
I think the wealthy, right? So you're talking like.
But wealthy means different things to different people.
Well, see, there's rich. And then there's wealthy, right?
Okay.
I think Chris Rock explained it best. He said, when Shaquille O'Neal played basketball, he said, Shaquille O'Neal, he's rich. He's making millions of dollars. But the man who signs his check, he's wealthy.
Okay, so you want the wealthy.
Yes.
Okay.
We want some of the rich too, but we definitely want the wealthy.
Okay. All right. But right now, again, if you're just joining us, Governor Hochul has pretty consistently opposed this. I would say a lot of sort of centrist Democrats have opposed this, and you haven't been able to get anything over the finish line, right?
No, not. Well, we have made some strides as it relates to implementing wealth taxes. We have done that at the state level of government. But as far as
where you want to go, as aggressive
re-
as where you want to go,
yeah.
It hasn't happened.
So I'm part of, and I've introduced legislations in what we call the IONI bills, which is Invest in Our New York.
Yep.
So looking at everything that's on the table as it relates to the Invest in Our New York bills, we haven't quite arrived to where a number of us are trying to go.
And one of the biggest critics of Governor Hochul has been the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. They say that she's been too much of a corporate Democrat. They want to see more aggression from the Democratic Party on this. What do you make of the DSA having this moment of growth and influence that they're having?
My thing is funny because when I first got in the state government, for some reason, it was assumed that I was DSA. I don't know why, but that was.
But you're not DSA.
I'm not DSA.
You're a Democrat.
I'm a. It's funny because when they said that, I said I'm a black man in America. Last thing I need is another title, right? But I'll say this: I'm about the community and the people who I serve. And if the people are in need, we as elected officials who in a representative government have a responsibility to help people and to meet them where they are and to help them grow. When we look at so many challenge systems throughout our community and throughout our state, we are in positions of power to affect change. If it's certain health issues, we can put additional monies and resources into research to accomplish an end goal of sorts. So that's just where I stand with it.
You don't need a DSA label, is what you're saying.
I don't need a label to advocate for those who I serve. And, one of the things that I often say, and I truly believe this, and we have to get the masses to understand this, that the power of the people is stronger than the people in power. Right? They elect us to be here, but it has to be an ongoing level of accountability. It can't be a selection season. We voted you in, and now we let you go and play. No, there has to be a consistent check-in of sorts and engagement, and to do what the community needs.
Do you think DSA's growth this particular election cycle has been healthy for the Democratic Party? Do you think the influence of the DSA is good for the party?
I think, when you look at what's taking place, I think it's something that everyone can learn from. As it relates to the party, I guess the question is, what aspect of the party and who's benefiting from that aspect of the party? I've seen some folks who ran on the issue of housing insecurity, on the issue of food insecurity. Yeah. And in some instances, they won Democratic primaries. So maybe they were bringing forth a message that, the incumbent or whoever they was running it against just didn't quite understand or relate to as it relates to the community they're serving. So some way, somehow, I think, my hat goes off to them as far as their organizing efforts, because we see they're doing some great organizing. But on the same token, I think that it has to be a wake-up call for the Democratic Party to recognize that, hey, there are certain communities, in particular African-American communities, that have been Democratic loyalists. And when we look at some of the challenges in our communities, it's like, okay, we've given our vote, but in turn, what type of benefits have we seen? So I think that, you have individuals like myself that recognize that go to bat for my community, that go to bat for the Rochester community and beyond. And I just think that it's a wake-up call.
Coming up here in our second half hour, we're going to talk about some of the things on the list that Assemblymember Meeks is talking about there when he talks about his vision of going to bat for Rochester. We'll talk coming up about very specifically about what that means and how that'll get applied here. I also want to tell our listening audience today, if you want to join the program, you can email, as always, connections@wxxi.org, connections@wxxi.org. You can call the program toll-free, 844-295-TALK. It's 844-295-8255, 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. If you're watching on YouTube, you can join the chat there on the WXXI News YouTube channel. Dallas says, regarding wealth and taxing wealth, he says Elon Musk created Tesla. He leveraged that wealth into Starlink and SpaceX. Would those things have been possible if we limited his amount of wealth?
Well, we're not limiting his amount of wealth. We're just calling for some levels of accountability as it relates to taxes.
Well, I mean, you're taking some of his wealth.
Yeah, but we're not putting a limit. He can continue to make even more money, but we're still calling for him to do his part.
To pay a higher percentage in tax.
Absolutely.
Okay. But you're not going to put an end cap on how – you're not in favor of saying, look, no one should be a billionaire. No one should be X
he's
rich.
on his way of being a trillionaire,
yes.
Right? So, that's just not what we've done. That's not something that we're saying that you shouldn't be a trillionaire.
Is
but
it immoral
I am saying
to
that,
be a billionaire?
I wouldn't say it's immoral, but I would say in when you have a country like the United States that's considered one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we should not walk out our doors. You shouldn't come to work every day and see the level of poverty that you ride by on your way to work. That just should not exist.
Right, and I understand that. I think part of what Dallas is asking is, if you get this level of taxation you're looking for, would it have stopped, for example, Musk from saying, oh, okay, I made X amount of money with Tesla, now I'm going to leverage that and I'm going to try to create Starlink and SpaceX and all these other industries. Would he be so limited by the taxation that you're talking? You don't think so?
I don't think it would limit him at all. I mean, we have our share of billionaires. I mean, Elon, I wish he was in New York State. We could tap into some of those additional resources. But no, that's just not the case. But we do have our share of billionaires in New York State and our share of millionaires that, we feel like can do more. And like I said, this isn't to say we want to set something in stone permanently, but I think that we have to look at, what we're challenged with in this time to say, okay, how do we lift everyone up at this time and move forward?
Maybe on that note, Chad says, if we're walking down the street together and I have $10 and you have $100 and we meet a beggar asking for some charity and I give him one of my $10 and you give him 5 of your 100, who is more generous with their wealth? That's what Chad is asking.
I would be giving more, but he would be more generous. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where you're going. Chad, tell me if I'm wrong there, if you want to send an email to follow up there. Okay, so I want to pivot to a separate story that was in the news about 3 weeks ago. And I'm going to read from the New York Times. A judge blocks New York State's attempt to force ICE agents to wear masks. Quoting from the Times now. New York's law prohibiting federal immigration agents from wearing masks and requiring them to display identification was blocked after a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction halting the ban. The Department of Justice has vehemently opposed New York State's efforts to rein in ICE, saying they represent an illegal push to regulate the federal government. In June, the Trump administration sued. Judge May DiAgostino of the Northern District of New York partially granted the Justice Department's request, saying she expected the federal government to succeed at trial with its argument that the state's face covering and identification acts directly regulate federal officers in violation of the Supremacy Clause. Judge DiAgostino wrote that New York officials might be correct that federal immigration officers wearing masks and not displaying identification creates certain dangerous situations that the Face Covering and Identification Acts remedy, but she added that settled law establishes that federal, not state, authorities make the policies that animate the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And the New York Times concludes, the ruling is a victory for the Trump administration, which has argued that ICE agents need to wear masks to protect them from harassment. What do you make of this?
So if I'm not mistaken, I think we won probably 2 or 3 decisions along with that same one that was handed out that we lost.
So here's the separate one.
So I don't have that in front of me.
Here's the separate one. The judge did rule with New York State on the state's broader ban on formal collaboration between local law enforcement and immigration agents that goes into effect tomorrow, August 25th. In her ruling, Judge DiAgostino allowed that measure to proceed.
So as it relates to the wearing a mask, I believe there was something, and I would need to tap into some of my lawyer buddies, but that allow you the right to face someone in court, right, that may have violated you. And if someone violates you with a mask on, how do you point that person out in the courtroom and say it was him, it was her that violated
not only
my
a mask,
constitutional
but
rights?
No badge, no displayed identification.
Yeah. So I truly feel like that practice is constitutional. And, for me, being one who knows my history, it's really ugly and it's a really grim practice. And it just naturally take me back to, what so many people endured in fleeing parts of the South and dealing with hate groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. The difference is we're funding this group unlike I mean, what do we fund better? The military? I mean, this is one of the largest budgets in our federal government right now, the ICE budget. So with that being said, I don't agree with that practice, and I think that we need to appeal this and fight it further. If you're engaging, people throughout our community, they should have the right to know who you are. And I don't think that's a good practice.
Reading the judge's words, she seems to indicate that on the merits, she agrees with your and the state's critique there, that this practice of wearing masks that ICE agents are doing and not showing any identification, she seems to think that that's a problem. She's also saying that she thinks it's pretty well established in law that the federal government's going to have the final say in this, not individual states. So do you think it just ends there? I mean, or do you think, look, we're going to keep trying to fight this higher?
Yeah, I think there's a need to continue to fight it. And, my hat goes off to the Attorney General. I mean, there's been a number victories that we've seen in New York State as it relates to pushing back against some of the things that have been handed down from the White House. And, one of the things that I recognize being an elected official, being one who took an oath to serve and to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of New York State, I think it's the Constitution seems to be only as strong as those who are committed to upholding the oath. Because we see certain things that's happening at the federal level of government that's absolutely unconstitutional. So you ask the question, how does this happen? Why are people standing by? Well, if you took the oath and you don't honor it, it doesn't mean much. And I think that's something that we're challenged with.
I'm going to take Jackson and Charlotte, Lynn and Brighton in just a second on the phones. One other point on this, though. That separate issue that I also read about, the judge did say that New York State's broader ban on formal collaboration between local law enforcement and immigration agents can proceed. What does that mean to you?
Well, that means that, when you talk about resources from the state of New York, from our localities, that we're not utilizing those resources to move a federal or a Trump agenda. That's what it means to me.
Okay, but does that mean that the RPD, that the Brighton Police Department, that whoever, that the Gates PD, they're not allowed to work with ICE, or they don't have to, or what? What's that?
More so they don't have to, and it also goes back to resources, right? I think back like historically when legislation was passed by, I think it was Reagan administration regarding the age of drinking, right? And it's like, okay, well, we're going to implement this across the country, and if you don't follow these guidelines, you wouldn't be eligible for additional resources that we're providing. And I think that's one of the things that we may have to do as far as accountability. We're saying that these resources from the state will not go towards this agenda that ICE has put forth. And we're not expecting our localities to collaborate with them, because the reality of it is there's so many people that are being affected adversely by these practices. And you get some folks who are our neighbors who have all of their documentation, born and raised here, but still going through these challenges. You've seen people murdered in recent months by ICE that were U.S. citizens. So I think that this sort of pushes back against some of those practices.
All right, last point on this, then I'll take the phone calls. What ICE will say, and probably what some supporters of ICE will say, is that New York State's law regarding collaboration between local police and ICE is going to block ICE from being able to track violent illegal immigrants. What we know is that the vast majority of who ICE has been going after this year have not been violent people. They have been people who've lived in communities for a long time. They've been people who've worked in various sectors of communities. Obviously, in Rochester, the roofers were the most high profile, but there's farm workers. I'm hearing stories in the Finger Lakes all the time about workers being picked up on the job. So they're not going after violent people the vast majority of the time. Having said that, let's say there is a case where there is a violent person and someone who has come here illegally and they have been violent. Would this law prohibit local law enforcement from working with ICE regarding someone who's been violent?
It would not. It would not prohibit them. And local law enforcement also have, rules and regulations that they can make an arrest, right? And they can also hold that person accountable. And personally, I feel like, this whole thing of, the violent criminals, it's like when you go to court, it's you versus the state of New York. If you violated someone here in the state of New York, you need to be held accountable in the state of New York. You need to do your time in the state of New York, opposed to a pat on the wrist and possibly been, shipped off elsewhere. So I don't agree with that practice.
All right, let me grab, this is Lynn in Brighton on the phone. Hey, Lynn, go ahead.
Hi, great show. I have 2 quick points. One is that this all seems overwhelming. You have a lot of shows about this. It's a lot on the news. But what your guest is doing is saying, it's not that complicated. Let's keep going back to our basic democratic principles, to the Constitution. That's our touchstone. And so things become much less overwhelming and complicated, and people can have opinions and not feel overwhelmed by all these details and all these cases and all these court cases. They want to make us feel overwhelmed. So we don't need to feel overwhelmed. We can do what your guest is doing and keep returning to our basic foundational principles. The other thing I just want to point out is that your guest, or rather the caller who asked, would Elon Musk have been able to do what he did if we had taken away some of his wealth? Taken away is an interesting question, but the person who asked the question and in general, and the way the question's framed dictates how we think. I have a different question to ask, and that is, would Elon Musk have been able to accomplish anything without the engineers, scientists, computer geeks, the people who were produced in this country by a funded educational system that our taxes pay for, by universities that were the best in the world and were funded in part by government grants? And no, he wouldn't have been able to do anything he did. So let's think about what questions we're asking. If we let the tech billionaires define the questions and the framing, we may not really understand what's going on. Let's think about the questions that we're asking and take a step back and think about the questions. I'm sorry, I'm not really asking questions. I'm making observations, but they just seem to me to be important.
Okay.
So
sure.
Anyway, thanks.
Lynn, thank you very much for the phone call. Go ahead, Assemblymember Meeks.
I didn't have a response.
Okay.
I think she was more or less making a statement.
Okay, well, I think part of what she's saying is no one gets to where they get to on their own truly. There's always a support structure.
Yeah.
An educational system, sometimes different safety nets. And so she's saying the question shouldn't be about how much is too much to tax Elon Musk. Elon Musk didn't create Tesla on his own. He didn't create SpaceX on his own. I understand that argument. I also feel like, to play devil's advocate, if the tax rate was 98%, that probably would stop people from being innovative, right? I mean, so there's probably a line somewhere. And I think part of what the previous email was asking is, where should that line be, right? I mean, and I understand Lynn's point too. Mm-hmm. No one can truly say they did everything alone.
That's true.
So where's the line? How do you find it?
Well, I think one of the things is like stepping back and taking a look at how much they actually contribute. When you look at those who tend to be extremely wealthy, they tend to know or have access to those who know all the different loopholes that they can go through or avoid and not pay as much in taxes. I remember years ago, and I never forget it, during Trump's first term, he said, "I don't pay taxes, and if you do,
you're kind of a sucker."
Yeah, you remember that,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
Because it sort of was a gut punch.
Right, but a lot of the people who support Trump were like, well, he's just a smart businessman.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I remember, when I was a labor organizer doing some of the advocacy for a millionaire's tax in New York State. And I remember talking to one of my dues-paying union members and saying, hey, I need you to sign this petition. I need you to support this. And he's like, well, why would I support that? I'm like, it's a millionaire's tax. It's calling for those who make more to do a bit more. He said, well, I wouldn't want to do more if I was a millionaire. I said, well, okay, well, do you have plans on being a millionaire? Maybe someday. I said, well, how would you go about that? He said, hell, I might hit the lottery. I said, wow, interesting. I said, how many millionaires you know personally that have hit the lottery? It's like, zilch, none. And I just think that sometimes people who are extremely wealthy or systems are in place that make those who are not feel like they did something wrong. And it's so far from the truth. When you look at everyone who are, working or doing something, they're contributing to society in their own way. You have people who work, make good money that, hey, you know what, tonight we're going to this restaurant to have dinner opposed to, but you may have someone working there who's making minimum wage, who's dependent on those tips. So I just think
It's
that
an interconnected system.
yeah, it truly is, and everyone's contributing some way somehow.
All right, let me grab Jackson and Charlotte next. Hey, Jackson, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Mr. Dawson, look, in all due respect, man, whenever I want to listen to some insane liberal woke speak, I tune in, okay? A couple of points. You're complaining about ICE wearing masks, but it seems like BLM and Antifa, it's fine for them. But ICE is a problem with masks. Okay, got it. Number two, Mr. Meeks, I believe, sir, you do not create wealth by taking wealth from others. Now, this is the most insane conversation in the nation right now with a party, the Liberal Democrats, who have tons of insane talking points. You do not help society by more handouts, by taking from people who have spent their lives with the liability, the toil, the work, the gambling, and to punish a man or a person or an entity for making it big and give to you, someone who may be sitting on the porch waiting for their ship to come in, is not the way to go about this. I believe in the capitalist system. If people are complaining about poverty, you've got to find a better way. If you don't find a better way, you don't find a better way. I'll ask you this. How many times have you seen a nature special where the big dominant lions killed the zebra and moved out of the way for the zebra who just can't quite catch that zebra? For the lion, rather. The dominant lions don't move over for the weak of the pack. We are the only species on the planet that is asked to move over for the weakness of the pack who can't do. And this conversation, man, this whole democratic socialist movement of woke speech has got to go because you're playing to a useful idiot and they can't comprehend their own demise.
So you spoke on capitalism. Let's tap back into capitalism. Let's talk about our history. What is your take on reparations? Those communities that historically help build this country and people made wealth. I mean, billions of dollars on the backs of others who work for free.
Yeah.
Is that your idea of capitalism?
Hey, man, I'm not talking slavery and capitalism, two different animals. So don't even get me into that corner, Mr. Meeks. And my take on reparations, it's called the welfare system. So you've had it. All right? Yeah, that's my take on reparations. The welfare system is your reparations.
Wow.
Okay?
Who is your? Now, when you say your, are you saying it's your reparations as like me being an African-American man?
I'm saying poor people in general. I'm saying people who can't do. I have no.
Well, you
problem
did say
with the
your
tax
in
You said
talking
your.
to a black man who by the way,
You
is
know
not
who I am.
poor. He's not
Wait a
poor.
minute. Hold on. I have no issue having my tax money going to people who need a little help. It's the single mom who's busting her back, but she can't quite make it. I have no issue. I have no issue for someone who is so, messed up with an arm or health conditions. No issue about it.
So Jackson, why can't we just pay the people, Jackson? Like you said, that single mother who's busting her back. I mean, that CNA worker, that home health aide, opposed to paying them minimum wage or $20 an hour. Why can't we pay them $100 an hour?
Oh, okay, then the hamburger's going to cost $300 an hour.
So now you're concerned about the cost of a hamburger, but what about her back? She's breaking her back.
Who hasn't, man? I've been farming my whole life. I've been in construction. I go to work every day with a broken back and don't have my hand out.
So
pay.
All right, hold on one sec, Jackson. I do want to ask you one question, and I want to say I appreciate you calling. I appreciate you listening.
Sure.
And you can call every day if you like. We'll take your call. So, I mean,
no, I could not take the liberal foolery, but whatever. Go ahead.
Okay. If that's what you think this program is, I actually don't think you're listening very often. But let me also just say this. You just made the point that you watch the nature channels and you think we're the only species that actually steps aside and helps the weaker are the humans, and you seem to have a problem with that. That there's something.
No, this is what I'm saying. Natural law cannot be violated by man-made law.
Okay.
It cannot exist.
Okay,
you can't
praise the lions, tracking down the weaker beasts and saying, why can't we be like that? And then say, but look, the single mom breaking her back, I'll give her a little bit. Now you're realizing that you didn't actually support us being like the lions.
No, you got that all wrong, Evan. What I'm saying is you never see the dominant lions get out of the way for the weaker lions who can't do, is what I'm saying.
But you and I are both saying that in the human species, we are the only ones who do that. And thank goodness that we don't just behave like the law of the wild, right?
But this is what I'm saying, is that system cannot maintain itself. It is not maintainable.
You know,
we're
Jackson,
seeing that now. It's not maintainable.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just also think, like, you know, when you talk about taxpayers, anybody that goes shopping, right, in New York State, they're paying taxes some way, somehow. I mean, but we act like the Elon Musk of the world didn't get hundreds of millions, if not more, in government tax breaks. I mean, when we have businesses that come here, I mean, think back to Xerox when they built a tower here in Rochester, downtown, 30 years tax free. You know, so I think that we quick to assume that people put themselves up by their own bootstraps, and that's just not reality. They leaned on government. They leaned on us as working class people paying taxes to benefit them, building their wealth and their
I completely agree. I would love to eliminate the IRS and go to a national sales tax. Absolutely. Nothing would make me happier than destroying the IRS, all right, and going to a national sales tax. So if you buy a car in Monroe County, that national sales tax goes directly to Monroe County. Then Monroe County deals with the state of New York, not Joe Sixpack, not mom and dad. Monroe County deals with New York State and state sales tax. Then New York State deals with the federal government and keep Joe Sixpack right the hell out of it.
Right.
No, we can agree on that, sir. Absolutely.
Jackson, just because I have to take a break an hour and I'm 17 minutes late, I'm going to let you go. But please email us anytime at connections@wxxi.org and call anytime. Despite what you think about whatever certain bent you hear, what we're trying to do in the public square is examine the issues. The reason that Republicans come on this program from New York State, the reason that Democrats come on is they know we're going to ask a lot of very thorough questions. As Assemblymember Meeks knows, he's going to be interrogated on his views. That's why I pressed him for specifics. That's why when we come back from this only break, he's going to tell you about a list of things he's been working on. And it's your chance to interrogate their ideas as well. And so please call anytime, Jackson. Thank you. We've got to get this only break in. We've got to do it now, and we're going to come back with Assemblymember Demond Meeks on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
All right, we got a lot to cover here. Assemblymember Demond Meeks is our guest. We've been talking to New York State leaders since the passage of the very late state budget in late May. Latest since you've been, I think, in the Assembly. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a little late. It was pretty late this year.
Yeah, it was.
So let me kind of give you the floor here. You've got grants to talk about. You've worked on public safety, education, infrastructure, and I know you want people to know what is sort of top of mind for you in your office. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that we've been intentional in doing. Some capital projects for organizations or community organizations that's doing some great things. We're looking forward to, I mean, it's Baden Street, those buildings over on Vienna Street have been there for well over 100 plus years. So we're working with them on a major capital project, which will be a major facelift to the community, but it will have some major impact as it relates to the physical facilities, expanding the family safety net resources, and creating safer community spaces as well. So that's going to be huge. Always engaging in workforce development and pipelines to help individuals get into like some great union jobs in order to create wealth. So we created additional resources go to create a debt-free pipeline into the skilled trades. So individuals can actually go into a number of programs. MAP is one of them, multi-craft apprenticeship preparation program.
Yep.
They're paid while they're trained on a job, and then they can land a good union job. And when you look at some of these jobs, we know that even with artificial intelligence, these jobs aren't being outsourced.
I was going to ask you about this because when you look at the history of job retraining programs that the government tends to spend a lot of money on, the results are mixed at best, and some of them are pretty poor results. Yeah. It's hard to retrain workers. It's not impossible, but it's going to be harder in the future in an AI world. You feel like this kind of a pipeline is more, these jobs are going to be more sturdy?
I think they are. I think they are. When you look at like the work, the carpentry work, the skilled mason, electricians, I mean, it's some intricate work that we have folks who have those skills and they live a really nice life. I know some folks who are in the construction trades and they live beyond the city in a nice suburban home on some nice acreage, and I think sometimes we talk about these opportunities, but we also have to show our youth, like, hey, this is how this individual is living, and this is the industry that they've been in for X amount of years. Because so many of us, we watch MTV Cribs growing up, right? And we've seen the fanciness of that. Yeah. But to go and see a person who has a skilled trade that's making great money and providing for themselves, and sometimes passing that skilled trade from one generation to the next. Yeah. So I think that's huge.
On your list of public safety ideas here, so 3D printed ghost gun legislation. What is it?
So what it does is those who are selling 3D printers in the state of New York, they actually have to assure that that printer doesn't have the app on there that can actually create these guns. So you can sell a 3D printer in New York State, but it should not have the option for a person to print a gun. Now the old ones,
there's not a law against that right now.
So with technology is moving, right? Like overnight. I mean, the things that we're seeing, a new app every day, new systems. It's not like the telephone where you went from the rotary phone to the push button and so on and so forth. So this technology is quickly moving. And honestly, I don't think that the laws keep up with the technology. So it's a number of things where we're playing catch up.
Okay,
we're playing catch up.
Okay,
in a lot of these spaces.
That's regarding ghost guns.
Yes.
And you supported what's going to be more than $38 million aimed at domestic violence reduction. How's it going to work?
Yes. So when we look at Rochester, per capita, we have higher incidence of domestic violence for some reason. And it's truly a challenge. So with those monies, it's statewide funding. The money will go towards some of the criminal justice services dedicated specifically to intimate partner violence, domestic violence intervention, and non-domestic sexual assault responses. And these resources will go not only to like law enforcement, but also to a crisis response team here in the Rochester community and victim advocacy groups that exist that are doing great work in this space, such as Willow for domestic violence.
Okay. Education and the Rochester City School District. Now, every year it's a question of school funding and foundation aid. Just briefly, paint the picture on what's happening in this budget on education and what you wanted to see.
So I think that there's some improvement as it relates to resources for our schools. We're seeing an increase of a historic increase, delivering over $1 billion of over each year, going to the school budgets across New York State. We've seen a huge increase in the Rochester City School District as well, and by millions of dollars, like it's in the tune of millions, but then also looking at some of the challenges that we've seen as it relates to health services. So we were able to secure $1.2 million, specifically a direct allocation to maintain school nurses, mental health support, and student health clinics. We find that a number of our children have some mental health challenges and don't have access to needed resources. So we're being intentional in securing that funding there. And then when we look at the trauma of the mass shootings in our community, some of those things directly impact students. So you may have lost a loved one, and then you're going to school the next day or the next week, and they're expecting you to be able to function, but your family didn't have the resources to connect you to a therapist or someone that could talk you through the trauma that you've experienced over the past weekend, right? So with that, we wanted to be intentional in
that's the $1.2 million,
correct,
for Rochester City School District,
correct.
Okay. And by the way, with infrastructure, I know we've talked about the High Falls State Park, which you've supported. There's money for the state park, which is going to be kind of unfolding year to year. There's a lot planned there. $20 million in direct aid for Rochester, and it looks like about $500,000 in road aid for the town of Gates infrastructure.
Yes,
just doing basic infrastructure.
Absolutely. When we look at the roads, that's often a challenge, and that's one of the conversations we often have with the town of Gates. Additional money and funding for those resources relating to CHIPS or the roads. And also in Gates, we've secured some capital funding and additional funding for the library system there as well. So, I'm the representative of the 137th District, which is a large portion of the city of Rochester, including all of Southwest Rochester, a large portion of downtown, Northwest, Northeast, and a snippet of a snippet of the...
I was told there'd be no geography quizzes here.
Oh, okay. Of a snippet of the Southeast. But anyway, we, represent those areas and also the town of Gates. So we're intentional in bringing additional resources, not only to the city of Rochester, but also the town of Gates.
15 seconds, you're going to hear the music. So we're at the end here. $2 million for Double Up food bucks.
Yes.
SNAP cuts have been a big issue at the federal level. Can
Absolutely.
New York State afford to fill in these gaps?
It's possible. There's ways that we could possibly do it, but it's really tough. When we look at the food insecurity, healthcare, we have millions of New Yorkers that's directly impacted by both of these things. So what the Double Up food bucks do, that's something that I continue to push during my tenure here. It's a dollar for dollar match on your SNAP benefits when you go to the public market, some of the farmers markets, as well as TOPS markets. So TOPS has also joined us in our efforts to feed the community.
All right, and you got to do this in one letter. Give me a letter grade, because you want to invest $25 million in Cannabis Reinvestment Fund. How is New York State doing with equitable cannabis industry? A, B, C, D, F.
I would say a C.
It's a C.
Yeah.
Can we talk about this on a future program?
We can.
All right, let's come back and talk about this on a future program. So it's not where you want it to be yet. We'll talk about it. Assemblymember Demond Meeks from District Number 137. You're generous with your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
More connections coming up.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.